Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. I didn't notice the suitcase at first. The Friday felt like any other. A simmering pot of chili on the stove, bills stacked neatly beside my laptop, the dog snoring under the kitchen table. 14 years of routine can make you blind to danger at your own doorway. Then she rolled the suitcase into the hall with the confidence of someone stepping onto a stage. "I'm going on a trip with another man," she said, chin lifted as though reading a line she'd rehearsed in the mirror. "And I don't care what you think." The room went quiet in that heavy, humming way right before a storm hits. I saw a flicker in her eyes. Expectation. She waited for a crash, a raised voice, a pleading mess. Instead, I folded the electric bill, set it down, and met her stare. "That's perfect," I replied, "because tomorrow you'll be my ex-wife." She smirked as if I'd told a corny joke, then tugged the handle and swanned out, perfume trailing behind like a taunt. The front door closed with a tidy click. The dog woke, blinked at me, then went back to snoring. I listened to the quiet and realized it didn't hurt as much as I expected. It stung, yes, like stepping on a thumbtack, sharp and mean, but not fatal. Funny what the truth does when it finally walks into the room. I washed the pot, put the chili in containers, and opened the office drawer I rarely touched. Inside lay a folder labeled, "Just in case." I'm a planner by nature. You buy insurance and hope you never need it. You file documents and pray they gather dust. Bank statements, property deeds, copies of her employment contracts I'd scanned when I helped her negotiate a raise. 14 years teach you the value of order. At midnight, I called a friend from college who'd become a family attorney. He answered on the second ring. Night owl, always had been. I laid out the facts without drama. By 2 a.m, the path was mapped. File first thing, freeze the joint card, secure the house, separate the business account I'd opened last year. I didn't mention her lover. He mattered less than my calm. I slept better than I had in months. The sunrise painted the kitchen a hopeful gold. I brewed coffee, fed the dog, and walked him through the quiet neighborhood. When I got home, I signed what needed signing and drove to the courthouse. The clerk moved through the paperwork with practiced efficiency, handing me a stamped copy that felt strangely light. I texted my attorney a simple, "Done," then put my phone away. The second task was practical. Move valuables from the home safe to a deposit box at the bank. I wasn't hiding treasures, just passports, birth certificates, a flash drive with our tax returns. Little anchors that keep a life from drifting when the wind kicks up. The banker chatted about baseball while I nodded, appreciating the normalcy. On the way back, I stopped for groceries. The checker asked how my day was going, and I heard myself say, "Peaceful." It was mostly true. Pain has a way of losing volume when you face it directly. Friends started calling that afternoon because news travels faster than airplanes. I gave them the short version. No insults, no speculation, no soap opera. She left for someone else. I'm getting divorced. I'm all right. A few offered couches or spare rooms. I thanked them and declined. This was still my house, still my table, still my dog snoring like a tiny freight train. That evening, I sat at the dining room window and replayed the past year with a clarity I wish I'd had earlier. Late meetings that ran later, new outfits bought for presentations, weekend conferences that didn't allow spouses. I remembered the way she started speaking about fresh excitement and reinvention, phrases that sound good on podcasts but feel different when you hear them at midnight from a partner scrolling her phone in the dark. The signs weren't subtle. I had chosen faith over evidence, as people often do when they love. The first night without her felt like stepping into a big, echoing room. Freedom can be loud. I cleaned the kitchen and put on an old jazz record. The house exhaled with me. The following day at work, I told my small team I'd be out for a few hours here and there handling personal matters. They nodded with the empathy of folks who've weathered their own storms. I buried myself in tasks, calls with clients, a product demo I'd been polishing, vendor quotes that needed review. Productivity isn't a cure, but it keeps the mind from spiraling. By midweek, my attorney had served the papers. He texted me a brief confirmation, followed by one line, "You did the right thing." I stared at those words longer than I expected. Doing the right thing doesn't mean it feels good, it just means you'll sleep at night. I didn't reach out to her, not to ask where she was, not to negotiate, not to argue. Silence felt like a steady bridge over a boiling river. I walked it, eyes forward. On Thursday, I found the courage to tell my parents. Dad went quiet the way dads do when they want to fix something, but no, this isn't a clogged sink. Mom asked if I was eating. I said yes. She made a casserole anyway and left it on the porch like a secret agent. I smiled when I saw the foil note. Heat at 3:50. Love, Mom. Neighbors noticed the missing car and waved longer than usual, brows upturned with polite curiosity. I kept my answers gentle and short. People remember how you behave in hard moments more than they remember the details that cause them. A week passed, then another. I adjusted to a new rhythm. Morning runs by the river, simple meals, quiet evenings editing photos on my laptop. I rediscovered the small joys that fade when a relationship turns into constant negotiation. Clean counters, a desk not piled with mail, music at a volume I liked without the comment, "Can you turn that down?" Through a friend of a friend, tidbits about her reached me. She wasn't hiding. They never do at first. Candlelit dinners posted online. Brunch photos in places we'd once visited together. The captions carried that breathless confidence of fresh infatuation. New beginnings, choosing happiness, life is short. I didn't comment, didn't watch her stories, didn't measure my worth against a feed. People will always curate highlight reels. Real life happens between posts. I focused on practical steps. The credit card company split our accounts cleanly. The mortgage stayed in my name. That had been part of our plan when we bought the house because my credit score was stronger. The car title moved over without friction. We had built a life that functioned because of details. Those details now kept me upright. 2 Fridays after her announcement, I boxed up the framed vacation photos. Not as an act of anger, just housekeeping. I labeled each box by year and slid them onto a garage shelf. Memory can be honored without living in it. The dog watched from the doorway, head cocked, tail thumping. He adjusted faster than either of us. Dogs love what's in front of them. One night I met an old friend, Marcus, for burgers. He asked how I was holding up. I told him the truth. Strangely steady, occasionally sad, mostly hopeful. He laughed and clapped my shoulder. "Man, you always were the calm in the room. Keep being that." On the drive home, I passed the hotel downtown where she and I had stayed on our 10th anniversary. I expected a surge of regret, maybe a tear. Instead, I felt gratitude for the version of us that had worked. We had tried for a long time. When love changed shape, we both ignored it until she couldn't anymore. She chose a door that didn't include me. It hurt, but it was honest. A 3rd week rolled through, and that's when the tone of the rumors shifted. Her posts slowed. Friends stopped tagging her. Someone mentioned that her new beginning had old complications. Debts, to be specific. The man with the flattering smile and mysterious projects had more charm than stability. I made no moves. I didn't need to. Consequences don't require cheerleaders. Late on a rainy Tuesday, keys rattled at the front door. The dog barked once and trotted to the hall. She came in with the suitcase that had left so proudly, mascara smudged, hair pulled into a rushed knot. The storm behind her seemed to follow into the foyer. "I'm back," she said, softer than I had ever heard her. I stood from the table and turned off the lamp. The kitchen glowed with the refrigerator's pale light. She searched my face for anger, maybe rescue. "It didn't work," she whispered. "He wasn't who he said he was. He wanted money. I made mistakes. I'm sorry." I let the words settle. Apologies need oxygen, not applause. I walked to the counter, opened a drawer, and took out the packet my attorney had prepared. I set it down gently. "They're finalized on my end," I said. "You can read them tonight." Her eyes filled, then overflowed. I didn't move closer. I wasn't cruel. I was finished. "There's a difference." She nodded, trembling. "Can I stay here until morning?" "You can have the guest room," I replied. "Clean towels are in the cabinet." I went upstairs and closed my door. Steady heartbeat, steady breath. Sleep came quickly. Morning brought sunshine and the scent of coffee. She sat at the table with the papers and a pen. She looked younger without defiance, older without certainty. "I don't know how to fix what I broke," she said. "You don't have to fix me," I answered. "Just sign and we'll be fair." She signed. The notary at the bank witnessed, stamped, and slid copies across the desk. It felt like checking out of a hotel where we'd both overstayed. We walked to the parking lot in a quiet that felt merciful. She turned, opened her mouth, closed it again, then whispered, "I thought you'd fight for me." I shook my head gently. "You told me not to care what you think." I finally listened. She looked at her shoes. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "we let the future do its work." She drove away. I watched the taillights until they blended with traffic. The sky was clear, the air crisp. I went home, opened windows, changed the sheets in the guest room, and dropped her key in a small bowl by the door. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I made plans for the weekend that were just mine. Hiking a familiar trail, catching a ball game, calling my sister to meet her kids at the park. By the time Sunday night arrived, the house felt lighter than it ever had. Still, I sensed a storm brewing beyond my fence. One I hadn't summoned. One I wouldn't need to manage. You can predict some weather after living with a person for 14 years. Clouds gather, choices collide, and the sky responds in its own time. What I didn't know yet was how quickly her world would tilt. The lover vanishing would be only the first crack. Her job, her reputation, the friendships built around her image, they were already wobbling, searching for new ground. I had said very little. But silence has gravity. It pulls masks off, lets truth land without assistance. I turned off the lights, patted the dog, and climbed the stairs. The night settled warm and quiet around the house. For the first time in a long while, the future felt like a room with the windows open, curtains breathing in and out, air fresh and honest. I slept with that feeling like a promise tucked under my pillow, not knowing that the next call I'd receive would mark the moment everything on her side began to fall. The call came the next morning from a number I didn't recognize. I was measuring coffee grounds when the phone buzzed across the counter. A crisp voice asked to confirm my name, then introduced herself from my wife's company, former company. They were conducting a routine review of expense reports and needed basic dates for a conference I had supposedly attended as a guest. I stared at the steam rising from the mug and said I had never joined any corporate trips. The woman paused, thanked me, and ended the call with the kind of politeness people use when their day just got complicated. I set the mug down and leaned on the counter. That explained the emails I'd seen on our shared tablet months earlier. Hotel confirmations filed under client development. Dinners labeled team outreach. My name had been listed as a participant even though I'd never set foot in those venues. She hadn't simply left for a fling, she had financed it with company money and tried to bury the evidence under acronyms. By afternoon, a friend from her department texted me a single line. They escorted her out. No shouting, no scene. Just a quiet walk from a glass office to a parking lot. A cardboard box balanced on folded arms. Years of ladder climbing reduced to a 20-minute meeting and a swipe of a badge that no longer worked. I didn't celebrate. I also didn't interfere. My role, from the first night she rolled that suitcase, had been steady refusal. No gossip, no revenge posts, no late-night speeches. I went to the gym, showed up for clients, paid bills on time, and kept the front porch swept. It's amazing how much life improves when drama leaves the calendar. 2 days later, she called. The number flashed across my screen and kept flashing. I let it go to voicemail. Silence had never felt so spacious. She left 3 messages, each one shorter, the last one just a breath and a please. I didn't press play again. That weekend, I drove to the trail that cut into the hills beyond town, a path we'd hiked together early in our marriage. Wind chimes clinked on a porch near the trailhead, and the air smelled like pine and warm dirt. I walked until my legs burned, then sat on a rock and watched hawks drift on thermal currents. For once, my thoughts didn't circle around what I could have done differently. I had apologized to myself enough. Now I was practicing a new skill, letting the consequences of other people's choices run their course without volunteering to be a cushion. Word spread among our circle that her grand romance had dissolved. No breakup post appeared, just a quiet erasing. A mutual friend admitted he had seen the guy at a bar bragging about seed money for his big idea, a pitch that sounded less like a business plan and more like an excuse with receipts. He had a smile like a movie trailer, exciting, loud, and gone in 90 seconds. Her pride, always well-tailored, started to fray. She reached out to folks she'd ignored for years. I heard about apologies that landed like paper airplanes. They traveled a short distance, then folded against the floor. Colleagues kept their distance while HR finished the audit. People like to stand near sunshine, not lightning. Meanwhile, I decided to refresh the house. Not as a makeover, more like a deep breath. I patched nail holes where our framed vacation photos had hung and painted the hallway a calm gray. I sold the couch that had become a silent battlefield and bought a simple, durable one that fit me and the dog. The living room lost clutter and gained light. Saturday mornings, I put on an old Motown station and worked room by room. Every donation bag felt like releasing a brick I'd carried too long. One evening, I opened a box of our letters. Some were funny, some earnest, some written during the optimistic years when we believed hard work could solve any mismatch. I kept a few for my records and recycled the rest. Loving someone doesn't obligate you to archive every draft of a story that changed genres. She finally cornered me outside the grocery store. I was dropping a cart into the line when she stepped from behind a pillar, eyes swollen, voice careful. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the weeks had pressed her down. "Can we talk?" she asked. "About what?" I kept my tone even. The parking lot hummed with traffic and cartwheels. "I'm sorry," she said, the words pushing out like something heavy. "I was selfish. I thought I needed excitement. It was foolish. I lost my job. He took money. I'm trying to fix it, but I don't know where to start." I nodded once. "I hope you find the right help." Her lips trembled. "That's it?" "That's all I've got," I said. "We made our choices. Mine is calm." She blinked, shocked by the absence of argument. Conflict had been our fluent language. My quiet sounded foreign. She took a step closer, then stopped. "I never expected you to be this cold." "It isn't cold," I said. "It's distance. I needed it to keep the rest of my life standing." She looked down at her shoes. For a second, I saw the woman I'd married, the one who laughed at my terrible puns, who sang off-key in the car, who built a backyard garden with stubborn joy. Then the image slid away like a photo underwater. She whispered goodbye and walked off, shoulders bowed. I drove home with groceries rattling in the trunk and put them away while a baseball game murmured on the radio. After dinner, I sat on the porch, the evening air warm and still. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, called from her swing to ask about the dog. We chatted about lawn trouble and the high school marching band. Ordinary talk felt like a blessing. A week later, her former company sent me a formal letter requesting any documentation that might help them complete their review. I forwarded what I had, nothing dramatic, just dates and receipts, and returned to my day. The next morning, my attorney called with an update. The divorce would finalize within weeks. We discussed property, accounts, and a clean timeline. He asked how I was holding up. I said, truthfully, that I felt lighter each day. He chuckled and told me to buy myself something foolish after the decree arrived. I promised to consider a ridiculous pair of running shoes. The fallout on her side kept widening. A friend who worked in recruiting mentioned that background checks now showed a termination for misuse of funds. The phrase looked harsh on a report, but it was precise. Job applications stalled. Interviews cooled. The professional brand she'd curated for years unraveled faster than a cheap sweater. I didn't gloat. I also didn't step in with references. Invitations to rescue often hide demands to rewind the past, and I had already stepped off that treadmill. Therapy helped. I went every Thursday afternoon and talked about control, about boundaries, about the stubborn desire to fix everything and everyone. The therapist gave me sentences that worked like tools. You can care without carrying. You're allowed to prefer peace. I practiced those lines until they felt natural in my mouth. I learned to sit with quiet without fearing it meant failure. In early fall, I took a short trip to the coast. Just me, a paperback, and a room that smelled like lemon cleaner and ocean air. I walked the pier, watched families chase gulls, ate fish tacos at a picnic table, and fell asleep to waves knocking the shore. On the last night, a band on the boardwalk covered old hits. Couples danced, teenagers laughed, and I realized I hadn't checked my phone in hours. That felt like progress. When I returned, a certified letter waited in the mailbox. Final decree granted. 4 lines of legal text turned a long chapter into a closed book. I made a small dinner, poured iced tea, and toasted the dog. He wagged like I'd shared a secret. 2 days later, She called again and left a calmer message. She had moved into a smaller place across town and wanted to drop off a box of my things she'd found in storage. I replied by text, suggesting she leave it with the doorman at my office. She agreed. The box arrived the next morning with a note on top. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope your life is good." I placed the note in a file with the decree, a tidy end to messy years. I heard from mutual friends that her support system had thinned. Some people stepped back out of discomfort, others because they had warned her and felt done. She started volunteering at a community center to fill the long days. That, at least, sounded healthy. Our city is full of second chances if you're willing to show up quietly and work. Meanwhile, my business landed a contract I'd chased for months. The team celebrated with pizza and laughter that filled the office. On the drive home, evening light turned the river copper. I rolled the window down and let the wind undo the last threads of the life I'd worn too long. One night, months after the first suitcase scene, she and I crossed paths again at a charity 5K. I wasn't running fast, just steady. She stood near the registration tent with a stack of water cups, volunteering in a bright t-shirt. She saw me, hesitated, then gave a small wave. I waved back. It wasn't warm or cold, just human. Later, as I passed the finish line, I noticed she was cheering for everyone, voice hoarse, smile real. Maybe that's what rock bottom sometimes gives people, a chance to rebuild with smaller bricks and stronger mortar. I went home, showered, and sat with a bowl of fruit on the back steps while cicadas sang. I thought about how revenge had tempted me in those early hours, the fantasy of public scenes and clever lines. Yet the answer that saved me had been quieter. I had chosen restraint and let time do work no speech could do. Her lover was gone, her reputation bruised, her career on pause, and none of it required me to lift a finger. My silence had been less a weapon than a boundary, a line that said, "Your chaos stays with you." Still, stories don't end with a signature or a finish line. There are always everyday tasks that follow: canceling old accounts, updating forms, learning to cook for one without wasting half a fridge, remembering to schedule dentist appointments she used to nag me about. I discovered new routes on morning runs, new recipes, new friends who knew me only as the guy with the friendly dog and the decent playlist. I began to think about the kind of love I'd accept someday: steady, kind, curious, allergic to drama. As fall tilted toward winter, a message arrived from a number I didn't know. It was from a reporter who covered local business, asking if I had any comment on an investigation into misuse of corporate funds at my ex-wife's former company. I deleted the message and placed my phone face down. Some chapters deserve no narrator. I looked around the quiet living room, at the couch that fit just right, at the dog asleep on the rug, at the stack of books I actually wanted to read. The house felt honest. My life felt earned. And although the past still whispered now and then, anniversaries on the calendar, songs on the radio, I found that the whispers no longer directed me. They floated by like breeze under a door. I didn't know when I would see her again. I didn't plan to, but I suspected our paths would cross one more time, not for drama, but for closure that settled deeper than any paper could. I sensed it the way you sense rain in the air before a cloud appears. The truth has a way of returning at the right hour, asking nothing, explaining everything. And when it arrived, I promised myself I'd meet it the same way I'd met every turning since that suitcase rolled down the hallway. With calm, with grace, and with a silence that protected the life I was finally learning to love. She reached out one final time in spring, not with tears or excuses, but with a quiet knock at the door. In her hands was a small envelope. Inside, the last of the paperwork confirming debts she had taken full responsibility for. Her eyes met mine, not with defiance, not with hope, but with something closer to peace. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, "for not screaming, for not humiliating me. Your silence hurt more than anger ever could, but it also made me face myself. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to start over." I nodded. There was no need for speeches. Sometimes the cleanest endings are the simplest ones. She left, and the door closed on 14 years of shared,